Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Paddock Pass Podcast, brought to you by Fly Racing as well as Rental Street. Don't forget to check out those two websites. Rental Street have loads of accessories for your street bike, not just for dirt bikes, where they're undisputed kings of handlebars and accessories. And Fly Racing as well. Everybody knows them from Supercross and motocross, but they also have a pretty comprehensive street bike catalog in terms of protection gear and whatever else. For our video watchers on YouTube, we're modeling some of the lifestyle. There we go. Dave, good job. Neil,
I love this t-shirt.
My name's Adam Wheeler. I'm joined by Mr. David Emmett and Mr. Neil Morrison. We're missing Steve English, but we'll give him a pass on this show as he was covering the Suzuka 8 Hour, so his body clock is probably all over the place. So Steve, see you on the next show. Hope you're enjoying listening to this one. We're going to talk about the Monster Energy British Grand Prix at Silverstone, some of the talking points, some of the stuff we saw, some of the opinions that we have. First of all, where is everybody? I'm currently trying not to sweat too much back in Barcelona, where it's only slightly warmer than the UK. Dave, you're still based down the road from Silverstone.
Yeah, I am a little bit north of Stevenage, which is about an hour away from Silverstone. I am in the box room in my mum's house.
And how is the Emmett digestive system? Because we missed you for the first couple of days of the Grand Prix. Neil and I mentioned this on the Paddock Pass Podcast note show. Well, the moral of the story is if you see a dodgy nut, don't swallow it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, stay away from dodgy nuts. That's definitely the moral of the story. Yes, my mum has got lots of sort of expired foods in her cupboards, and so she doesn't anymore because we cleaned them all out. But I made some food on Monday night, and that proved to be a big mistake. I was extremely ill. So was my poor wife. And I was sort of generally just sort of had all the life sucked out of me for nearly a week, but pretty much back to normal again. I had fish and chips last night, and if that isn't an assault on your digestive system, then I don't know what is.
Good effort, Dave. Neil, you're currently residing in the finest city in the world, I believe.
I'm not in Barcelona, no. I'm actually in London for a few days. Decided to come down here for a little 2-day trip after the race. Got a few friends that live down here, so a nice opportunity to catch up. And the sun is it's shining. I think we're expecting around 30 degrees today in London, so a bit of a heat wave approaching the UK now, and it's quite nice being sat here in shorts and t-shirt.
Neil, do you have a new pair of earphones? Because I can't see the usual kind of 10-year-old threaded wired pair that you usually have. Have you upgraded?
I have, yes, exactly. The benefits of the Paddock Pass Podcast Patreon tiers.
Yes, thank you very much, dear Patreon listeners and subscribers, for helping keep Neil towards the 21st century. Good effort, Dave. You're motorised, aren't you? You actually skipped through the chaos of Schiphol, decided to bunk the plane, and got on your bike to Silverstone, and then you're going to be pretty much on two wheels for quite a while, and heading towards the Grand Prix of Austria.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, gosh, I love motorbikes. Motorbikes are genuinely really quite awesome. This was my third race in a row on a motorbike. This afternoon, once we've finished the podcast and packed up and everything, we'll be riding over to Harwich to get the boat home. Fortunately, Harwich and not Dover, because Dover is still a bit of a nightmare, I think, and Harwich is not too bad. From then on, starting sort of pretty much Sunday evening, I'll start heading down to Bavaria, where I'll be meeting our friend and colleague Cormac GP on Monday night, and then Tuesday and Wednesday we will be riding through southern Germany, Austria, on our way to the Red Bull Ring, and then after that I've got a long ride home as well. So it's lots of motorbike action for me. So I'm deliriously happy. My ideal life would be a day on the bicycle, a day on the motorbike, a day on a bicycle, a day on the motorbike. But that's the life goal.
Yeah, sadly work gets in the way.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. If I could manage to do me work in sort of half, if I could knock it out in like 45 minutes of an evening, then I'd be grand. But 45 minutes invariably end up turning into about 12 hours.
Dave, just quickly, two things that might be of interest to the listeners. I saw you coming into the Silverstone Media Centre wearing is it the Tech Air 5?
Yes,
the
it's the
Alpine
Tech Air 5.
Stars, the airbag. Thoughts on that? And also, you've been using the 6D street helmet. Like Fly Racing, like Rentals, 6D have a helmet for street bikes, for riding on the road, not just for off road. Thoughts on those two things? I mean, are you finding them comfortable or pretty decent, or have there been a few points you'd like to see improved?
No, I mean, like the Tech Air airbag. When you pick it up, it's really heavy, and you think it's going to be, it's going to be a bit uncomfortable. Once you're wearing it, you just literally, it disappears. You don't notice at all. It is sweaty because you're literally riding around on a plastic bag, more or less. So it does get quite sweaty. And so you do have to give it a bit of a wipe down with a damp cloth at frequent intervals. But it's really great. It's really comfortable. Works really well. Well, I mean, like, I hope it works really well, but then again, I hope I never find out. And similar to the 6D, I mean, like the 6D is, it's a premium helmet. It is honestly the most comfortable helmet I've worn. Previous to this, I had an RI RX7, which was an outstanding helmet, but this is like a step above. And I mean, yes, it's there to protect me from concussion should I ever have a crash. But the thing is, I don't want to fall off and find out. But yeah, I mean, it's great. It's well designed. It's well put together. I mean, if there's a minor niggle, I've fitted an intercom system to it, and then getting the cheek pad back in is a bit of a fiddle. And it's the sort of thing that I'm actually not very good at. I would make a terrible helmet tech. There would basically be like an hour and a half break between sessions while I prepared a new helmet instead of about the minute and 30 seconds that the professionals do. So but I mean, genuinely very, very, very pleased. So looking forward to riding down to Austria.
Well, listen, without any further ado, round 12 of 20 at MotoGP at Silverstone, the Monster Energy British Grand Prix. Neil, what was your moment of the weekend?
I think my moment of the weekend had to be the final lap pass that Enea Bastianini put on Jorge Martin. I thought it was one of the rides of the day. I think a lot of the focus was rightly on the guys that finished on the podium. I mean, each of those guys had outstanding races. But I think Enea Bastianini might just top a lot of them, considering that he had his left wing broken off in the first corner in a collision with Jorge Martin, who pushed him into Marco Bezzecchi. And I think he had to come back from 13th at one point, or 11th, I think it was.
11th.
Sorry, it was 11th, yeah. It was 11th on lap 9, and basically made like just pretty radical progress late into the race. And it did make you wonder if that wing wasn't broken, could he have even caught the leader, such as his late race speed? We haven't seen Bastianini as good since Le Mans, where he last had his victory. He'd gone missing basically for 4 races. And the fact that the move was on Jorge Martin when those guys are locked in this interesting battle for Ducati's second factory seat, which will be decided after the Austrian Grand Prix. I mean, the timing of it felt quite critical. So I thought it was great ride for Bastianini, fantastic move, and the fact that it was Martin that he passed, I think, must have tasted extra sweet for him. So Martin's reaction after the race, I think, said everything you need to know about how he felt about being passed by the Italian.
Yeah, I mean, Bastianini actually sort of downplayed it all. Oh no, that's not so important. There's lots of other factors which are important, but he did have a very smug look on his face. He was lucky that it was his what was it? Hang on, a left wing that got knocked off, because there aren't very many left-handers around Silverstone. It's mostly right-handers, and he said that, like in the left, he could feel the front pushing and the front sliding, and that was where he was having the problem. But because it's a left-hand it's a left-hand circuit, it affected him much less. If you compare it to, say, I think Luca Marini at Assen, where he lost the right wing at a right-handed circuit, he said, the bike was almost unrideable. It's really, really difficult. So these sort of things can also rely on luck. But it was an amazing ride by Bastianini.
Was it also Miguel Oliveira? It was in Catalonia, I think, where he lost the side pod or a wing as well that pretty much inhibited his race. So I know we want to keep this section of the show brief, guys, but Neil, do we really believe that that second factory Ducati seat is still open and has to be decided? I find it, impossible to believe that Ducati would keep these two guys hanging. I mean, you think someone like Carlo Bernat or, the various representatives of each riders will be knocking on Giabatti's door every 5 minutes, wanting to know something.
Yeah, I think it's entirely reasonable that it's still open because there's been extenuating factors. I mean, if you're looking at the championship, it's obvious that it goes to Bastianini, but Bastianini's on a year-old bike, a bike that hasn't really needed to be developed. And okay, it's the development has stood still, but from the start of the year, he had a very, very well-sorted machine, whereas Jorge Martin is on a different Ducati from the factory guys. He's never really been able to feel completely comfortable with it. And he's had a sort of myriad of fitness issues as well. And, Bastianini's form before the summer break was awful. I mean, it was really, really bad. He did go missing essentially for an entire month. And in that time, Martin was scoring some pretty impressive results, notably that second place in Catalunya. So I think they were correct in not rushing into this and to give Martin a bit of benefit of the doubt. We're going now to Austria afterwards, where he has been sensational in the past, scored his first MotoGP win last year as a rookie. So let's see how he performs there, but I really don't think this is an easy decision.
Coming to my moment of the weekend, I want to stay with Ducati and talk a bit about Johan Zarco because you basically shattering the lap record, taking pole position, leading out front. I do wonder, this is 6 seasons now for the Frenchman still to score a first win in MotoGP. I do wonder if it's starting to come a little bit of a monkey on his back. Is he ever going to win a race? When's it going to come? Is there more pressure now? All right, easy on the cynicism, Dave. I haven't finished yet. I just, every time he hits the front, I wonder if that's going to be something that's playing on his mind, especially as he gets towards the end of a race. I know riders are completely in the zone and they're focusing very much on the moment, but it's just been such a long streak now. Also for Zarco, his record at Silverstone seems to be particularly bad. He crashed there in 2019, taking out Miguel Oliveira in the process, actually causing the Portuguese to have a pretty hefty shoulder injury. And then I think in 2021, last year, in fact, he finished 11th, which was hardly a result of note. So I think the moral of the story is don't put your chips on Johan, even if he is shattering lap records when we go to Silverstone next August. So that was mine. Dave, I know we're going in a little bit of a reverse chronology here, but what was your moment?
I mean, my moment of the weekend was Aleix Espargaro, that massive crash he had in FP4, the start of FP4. At Farm turn 12, it came, the rear came around on him, spat him off. It was an extremely ugly crash, and he was lying on the asphalt for a long time. He was lying on the side of the track for a long time. It took a long time to get up. It was actually great to see him actually get up and be walk. Well, I mean, I wouldn't really call it walking. It was more hobbling. But at least he was moving around. At least it was clear he had the use of everything. After the race, we found out that he'd fractured his heel. They didn't
his
spot
right heel.
it. Yeah, exactly. He didn't spot it immediately. Up until that point, it looked like Aleix Espargaro had this weekend. I wouldn't quite say in the bag, but I mean he was absolutely the favourite for the race. He had an opportunity to really start to make inroads with Fabio Quartararo, with Quartararo having a long lap penalty, but he managed to spit himself off. Now, riders will always make mistakes; they'll always crash at some point or other. But the timing of this crash was particularly unfortunate. He got away with it. He ends up losing just 1 point to Fabio Quartararo because Quartararo had such an absolute nightmare during the race. But I mean, it really feels like a lost opportunity. And rider error, going out, hard tires, temperatures are not quite there. It was on his second flying lap. Rear just sort of lets go and then grips and then spits him off.
Let's launch into our talking points from the Grand Prix. I'll go first because it's quite generic, but I wanted to talk or discuss or get your guys' views on Silverstone generally. For me, I left the hotel maybe just before 7 a.m. I thought, okay, this might take me an hour to get in. And I was pretty surprised and also maybe a little sad to be, fully parked up and walking into the media center by 7:30. The run into the circuit was as if it was a Thursday. So then there was like a little alarm bell there where I thought, okay, maybe the crowd's not going to be so big. I contacted Silverstone actually in the run up to the Grand Prix, through Potsky Media. The agency are doing a fine job of doing the press and PR for the circuit. And an official statement came through from them that they were not expecting the same size crowd as 2021, which they put partly down to Valentino Rossi's last British Grand Prix. I mean, let's not forget that Rossi is one of the most winningest riders of the British Grand Prix in recent times. And they were looking more towards a 2019 type crowd, which I think was just over 100,000 for the weekend. I think it totaled more than that this time, but we only had a crowd of 41,000, and which, at a circuit with such huge epic scale and capabilities to house far more people as Silverstone, so spread out, it's almost next to nothing, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't look particularly impressive. So it's a curious thing because I love the track. I think it's a fantastic racing circuit. It seems to have a little bit of everything. And I think, those first corners, Copse through Maggots, Beckett, Chapel, I think it is, it's fantastic to watch straight into Hanger Straight. It's very wide. And then we were asking a lot of riders about it in the media debrief, as we tend to do every year. And it's interesting to get opinions of new guys, people like Raul Fernandez, Remy Gardner, Luca Marini, a rider who was coming back to Silverstone for the second time after tasting MotoGP, or what it's like on a MotoGP bike for the first time in 2021. And just to hear their words about how they like to attack the surface and, the layout. It's a track that still has great grip after the resurfacing, of course. And just look at the races that we had on the Sunday. I think the cumulative time between all three classes in terms of winning distance was 0.8 of a second. And I think there wasn't a gap bigger between all three podium finishes in every class more than half a second, 0.6 or something. I mean, you can't get closer racing than that. Even if it's quite clear that Pecco Bagnaia is going to be incredibly difficult to pass, and Maverick Vinales made a couple of mistakes on the last lap, and he thought, okay, he's screwed it up. Even you could tell that from when he went wide into Copse. It's great stuff. It's gripping stuff. I think if you're at the track and there's a great commentary team there as well, with David Emmett and Neil Hodgson, and them taking the feed directly from BT Sports. I think, you have entertainment. There are other factors involved, of course. It's an earlier date, ticket prices. David, you and I were discussing this on the Paddock Pass Podcast note show, but having a parking fee that's almost 50% of the entry fee seems a bit excessive. So it's just a shame that there's not more people there. And I think 2021, the bigger attendance not only was because of Rossi, but because people were wowed by that finish by Alex Rins and Marc Marquez. Hopefully now people will have seen the clips on social media or through the TV or some sort of screen and thought, wow, Silverstone delivers some pretty good action and they'll come next year. So I just wonder what you guys thought. I mean, is Silverstone an essential part of MotoGP? Should it always be there?
For me, it's one of the great motorcycle racing circuits. I mean, the absolute pinnacle, you have Phillip Island and Mugello. Just below that, you have Assen, Silverstone, maybe Barcelona. Barcelona's a bit not quite at the same level, but it's that kind of idea. So yeah, I mean, it's absolutely it's perfect for motorcycle racing. In fact, to my idea, it's much better for motorcycle racing than it is for cars, for F1, because it flows. It's a really flowing circuit, and that's what you need when you've got motorcycle racing. It's flat. It's a long way from public transport links. It's because the parking, that's really expensive. Also, they've moved it, instead of it being the last weekend in August, which is the bank holiday weekend, which is traditionally the last weekend before people go back to school, and so everyone is back at home. The beginning of August means it's right in the middle of the school holiday, so you would expect a lot of people to be away. I definitely think the absence of Valentino Rossi made a difference. I think that the absence of Marc Marquez probably made a difference as well. Those two are. I mean, Valentino Rossi is. There's no point in saying he's a big name because that would be to vastly underestimate it. But Marc Marquez has got a lot of star power as well. He's got a lot of pulling power. I think the spectator experience is more difficult. It's a very, very big circuit. It's absolutely huge. So walking around it is difficult. There aren't very many viewing spots apart from the grandstands. You really need to be in a grandstand to be able to see stuff. What they really need is some of the earth banks like they have around Assen to get people sort of 2-3 meters up off the ground so they can see over the track. But I think there were lots and lots of reasons why crowds were low. And it's a shame because it's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's a shame to see those numbers, especially when you compare it to the Formula One race that was at Silverstone a little more than a month ago. I mean, the crowd that showed up on Sunday for MotoGP was more than 100,000 less than F1. I think they had 142,000 fans through the gates on race day, which is a staggering number and sort of reflects the kind of position that Formula One is in at the moment, with riding on the success of the Netflix show, and I guess a fairly exciting title fight. Some big names in the sport. I think, as David has mentioned, at MotoGP at the moment, I mean, I think any sport would struggle to deal with the loss of its two biggest characters. Rossi's retired, Marquez isn't here. If you took Federer and Nadal out of tennis, would it be the same sport? If you took Hamilton and Verstappen out of Formula One, would it really be the same thing? So I think that is an element. And then just looking at the kind of the ticket prices, I mean, it wasn't cheap to get to the Silverstone this year. There is the cost of living crisis at the moment. And looking at a lot of grandstands, you're looking at £100 plus to sit there for the weekend. So I mean, it's a pretty sizable amount of money to go. And as Dave said, the spectator experience at Silverstone isn't maybe as good as it would be at maybe like a Jerez or a Barcelona or a Mugello, where you can get really close to the action at quite exciting points in the track. I mean, I've spoken to people that have gone to Silverstone before as spectators and watched the round in Beckett's complex, and I mean, it's a fabulous piece of racetrack, and it's really exciting to watch the trackside cameras there picking up the speeds that the guys are doing as they hurtle towards those bends. But I think as a spectator, you're way, way back. It's flat, maybe just doesn't have that same kind of impression of speed when you're watching so far away. So I wonder if that's a factor as well. I was disappointed because when I was walking around the track, our commentary boxes were on the outside of the final turn at Woodcote Corner. When I was walking there on Saturday morning, I mean, it was rammed around it. But obviously, it just seemed that the fans were concentrated in that part of the track. So disappointed to see just 41,000 there on Sunday.
Yeah, there's a couple of good points now. I mean, certainly about the personalities involved. I mean, when it comes to comparison to Formula One, then it's probably the most stark location where you can make that comparative view, because Formula One also is like the spiritual home of Silverstone is rather the spiritual home of Formula One, isn't it? I mean, they've always had big crowds there. The British Racing Drivers Club has such a large presence at Silverstone. I also saw a lot of people gathered around Woodcote, the Monster Energy area where they had kind of extreme sports going on, BMX displays. There's quite a large interactive area. I mean, and of course the music stage. There's things going on, I guess. So you can get sort of extra value for money for your ticket if you're prepared to wander around and do that stuff. But I think it was just kind of a perfect storm of timing. I mean, in the UK, they've just had the Women's European Football Championship that sort of took a lot of attention. Maybe people were getting out to see that. The Grand Prix coincided in the same weekend as the launch of the Premier League football season, because they're starting earlier due to the FIFA World Cup happening in Qatar at the winter, so they have to take a break. I just wonder if, and also let's not forget, after the pandemic, perhaps 2 summers where people were reluctant to travel, now they have a little bit more, or it's easier to do so. So perhaps people are away and getting away. It's I think Silverstone perhaps just slipped down the list of priorities, but like you mentioned, Dave, and also Neil, for spectators, it's either I think you love it or you kind of can live without it. But I think it's amazing. It's a place with really rich history, and I just hope it's sort of there's not people counting the money in an office somewhere now thinking, we're going to be struggling for MotoGP again next year. Let's perhaps reduce our investment or whatever. Keep going, guys, because it's a great event.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the lessons here is just what a difference Drive to Survive has made for F1. They're getting 100 million views, someone told me, on each episode of Drive to Survive, and it's brought in masses and masses of new fans. And it sort of shows the failure of MotoGP Unlimited. That it managed to capture that same sort of spirit and an atmosphere. MotoGP. I used to feel good about MotoGP, knowing that in terms of sort of media vibe, social media buzz, MotoGP was streets ahead. But we now feels like we've really, really fallen badly behind. And I think MotoGP it is a little bit in trouble, especially coinciding with the loss of Valentino Rossi, who was such a big name, and then also losing Marc Marquez to injury at the same time. That's a bit of a problem. I mean, in terms of personality, like Fabio has a bit of personality. Jack Miller is a massive personality. Pecco Bagnaia is a lovely lad, but quite introverted, very closed. Everything is very everything has been a bit sort of corporated down. People are a bit afraid of saying things. So I think there is cause for concern. But then you look, if you go and look at Le Mans with 110,000 people. You look at Sachsenring, which was also I think 100,000 people, 105,000 at Assen. So it's not all bad news, but yeah, there has to be more, and I think especially in the UK, it's going to be a bit of a problem.
Well, also the Grand Prix, I think, was the first time since 2010 where there was not a British rider on the Silverstone grid, either in a full-time or a wildcard capacity. So that also perhaps has something to do with it. I think the people that did go to Silverstone or were on the edge of buying a ticket but didn't are quite informed. I mean, they know the Brits have rookies like Josh Watley and Scott Ogden, Jake Dixon. He's another Marmite figure. Is as likely to try and fight for a podium, and he did make it and was incredibly close to the win actually in Moto2. So that there are hopes for the British crowd. It's not like there's a complete dearth of racing talent there. But yeah, I mean, you're right, Dave. It's the MotoGP Unlimited thing. I think Dorna need to have some sort of update. They need to give some sort of news. Does it stay on Amazon? Does the project continue? Can they get on Netflix? Whatever else? I think that's it's becoming quite a powerful asset now, and they need to make some sort of movement there.
I spent a week in the UK before I went on to Silverstone, just catching up with some friends that I hadn't seen, some of whom I hadn't seen since the pandemic started, really. And one of them was kind of asking me just about MotoGP in general, and he mentioned that he had watched, I think, the previous race that was shown on ITV at the Sachsenring. And he said that he turned it on and he was like, I don't know any of these names. And, before, I think for even a person with only a small knowledge of the sport, they would turn it on and they would automatically recognize Rossi, Marquez, Lorenzo, maybe Dovizioso, Pedrosa, huge big names. And I don't think at the moment there is that instant recognition for people that don't really have a firm interest in the sport. Not yet, anyway. Obviously, it depends on country to country. France, obviously, there's a huge buzz around Fabio. Rightly so, he's the world champion, France's first ever MotoGP world champion. But I think in a country like the UK, where MotoGP does sort of feature fairly far down the order in terms of popularity of sports in general. At the moment there isn't that automatically recognizable figure that is, you're someone that's just going to put
the marquee name.
Tens of thousands of bums on seats. Maybe there isn't that name at the moment, and I hope that I think that's why everyone is really hoping that Mark can come back sooner rather than later and be as competitive as he was in the past, because we sort of need him there to not just display what he displays with his brilliance on track, but maybe just stir things up a bit like he always did in the past as well.
Neil, you're a marquee name, and that's why everybody's going to come and join us right after this first ad break, where we'll get to your talking point from the British Grand Prix. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass Podcast. We're talking about Silverstone. Neil, what stood out for you? And I know your topic already, and I just want to ask if you're really prepared to go there, because it's something that we've talked about numerously over the years, and it's a bit of a minefield. What's your latest thoughts on Maverick Vinales?
It's the Maverick minefield, and I'm going to go there, Ad. Yes. Yeah, I mean, you could be smug because you were tipping him for victory on Thursday.
I'm never smug. I'm never smug. Come on.
Yeah, but he didn't win out, so you can wipe that smug smile off your face.
Was it like this, or was it like this? I'm not sure how far away he was from victory. Again, that's probably one for our video viewers on YouTube, but I think it was probably the width of my laptop.
Okay, right. I don't know whether you were describing the width of your smile there when you were doing that. But, yeah, I think Vinales was probably the big talking point from the weekend, just because it was the best performance that we've seen from him so far in MotoGP. I think it was the first time. The best performance we've seen from him so far in Aprilia in MotoGP. It was the first time that we had seen him as like the fastest guy on board the Aprilia. At Assen, he was really impressive. He got that third place, but there was the caveat that Quartararo crashed out in front of him. Aleix was taken out in front of him. And he was a little lucky that Jack Miller didn't quite take the podium. I think, there's a few things there where you could say if it played out differently, Maverick would have been fifth or sixth. But here, I think there was no doubt that he was the quickest guy on track, maybe along with Bastianini in the final laps. He was aggressive. He was fast. He was overtaking people with kind of impressive regularity. And I mean, we could just notice, I think, from Thursday that he was striding around, he was smiling, and there wasn't that kind of, maybe I wouldn't say fake optimism, but it's sort of, he has been like in a good sort of, he's been in high spirits all year. He's been talking up his chances quite a lot, but I don't know, there was a few times where I just thought, I'm not sure I believe exactly what you're saying, but now, and this weekend, I certainly had the impression that he believed in himself, and he believed that he could now win a race, and he kept on saying it's only a matter of time. And I think after this race, you have to say that it maybe is only a matter of time before he starts winning with Aprilia, because he's found that sweet spot with the bike. I spoke to Paolo Bonora, Aprilia's racing manager, after the race, and he said they made a setup change with the chassis Amethyst electronics at the Saxon ring, which basically allowed Maverick to enter corners smoother, and that's really helped him, particularly on his fast lap times. Maverick was really struggling at the start of the year in qualifying. That isn't such an issue now. He qualified in the front row here this weekend, and I think everyone secretly was kind of had their fingers crossed for him when he was fighting with Bagnaia at the end. He didn't quite make it, but I think Mac is back. I think that is the story from Silverstone. That's the takeaway.
Do we also have to give him some credit because he's been on the bike less than a season? He joined Aprilia in pretty emotionally turbulent circumstances. I'm trying to think of riders before who have changed manufacturers and managed to be near victory quite so quickly. I mean, if you look at supposedly the aliens, I mean, Casey Stoner obviously moved from, Ducati to Honda, had a winning start. Jorge Lorenzo took a half season with a Ducati before he was able to post victory, but
season and a half. Sorry, yes, I missed the first year. So, I think the fact that Maverick is right on the edge, 2 podiums in a row now, is also a testament to his skill. And it's very interesting listening to Aleix Espargaro these last couple of weeks, because he's in a championship winning position, as we know. And Maverick really is being like the team player, isn't he? He's embracing this family atmosphere at Aprilia, and he's pushing for Aprilia. It's not just a Maverick Vinales show. You saw him towing Aleix around in free practice. I think, he's stated as well that he wants Aprilia to win the World Championship. It's a very, I think, conducive environment there for him to do well, because he has been one of those riders where as soon as things start to look a little pear-shaped, as soon as there's some sort of trouble on the horizon, then he just sinks into this funk or this depression where he just wallows.
And then Nadia, of course, was last year with Yamaha, and then trying to blow up the bike around Red Bull Ring, which we go to next. So it's been a very sort of strange 12 month for Maverick Vinales. I mean, he must have been really going through some serious ups and downs. But I agree with you now. I mean, I really hope this is a big renaissance, and we're finally going to see. I mean, there's fewer riders on the grid that can pick up and really find traction like Maverick Vinales. And he seems to be really gelling with the Aprilia to the point where we're going to see an explosion of results.
I think you just have to sort of doff your hat to Massimo Rivola and his Aprilia team. It wasn't so long ago that we were saying that Aprilia couldn't find suitable backup for Alessio Spargaro, and part of the reason was because of the ongoings in the Aprilia garage. You got the impression that it was a bit slapdash, it was a bit wild, wasn't a great amount of organisation. There wasn't very good man management. You think back to Sam Lowes when he was in that team in 2017.
And Scott Redding.
Scott Redding, what was his comments at the Red Bull Ring that year? You wouldn't believe some of the things that are going on behind the closed garage doors. They shouldn't be happening in the factory team, something along those lines. And I think their approach with Maverick has been absolutely spot on. That was one of the interesting moments, I think, in the MotoGP Unlimited series, whenever Maverick was being unveiled at the Noale factory, and we saw Massimo Rivola was basically telling all of the engineers, like, make this guy feel welcome, make this guy feel at home, make this guy feel loved. That was another thing that Paolo Bonora said to me on Sunday. He said, we recognize that he's a very, very sensitive rider and a sensitive person, and he needs that kind of love. He needs that sort of warmth. He needs to feel trusted. And he said he's made it absolutely clear that every person in Maverick's garage has had to make an effort to ensure that he trusts them. Because it was clear that wasn't the case in Yamaha. He felt it was kind of he was all alone in this kind of factory that maybe didn't quite have his back. Really have been very patient with him. Results at the start of the year were iffy. Some decent results, but some not so decent results. And when Espargaro was picking up regular podiums, I think it would have been understandable, I think, if Aprilia maybe looked elsewhere for 2023. I think some of us were actually expecting them to look elsewhere, especially when Alex Rins and Joan Mir came on the market. But I think the fact that they decided to stick with Maverick, sign him up for 2023 and 2024, I mean, that must have been a massive confidence boost for him to help him feel settled, and they just believed in him. And we know he's still got some faults. We know that he isn't the absolute finished article in terms of race wins. We even saw that on Sunday. I mean, he should have won the race on Sunday, but I think he didn't quite get his last lap just absolutely right. There were two clear mistakes there which prevented him from catching and overtaking by Nye again. But I think just Aprilia's role and their management of him has been absolutely second to none. And it's just such a change from how they used to do things, just a couple of years ago. Again, Massimo Rivola turning out to be pretty much the star of this season, I think.
The reason they kept Maverick is because this is something that we as journalists and as fans don't see. We can't see the data. We can't see what Maverick is capable, what all of these riders are capable of. Team managers will talk to engineers, they'll talk to they'll talk to crew chiefs, they'll talk to all the rest of it, and they will look at the data, they'll examine the data, and they'll be able to see, like, okay, yeah, he can do this and he can do this and this, and he may not be able to do it for an entire lap, and he may not be able to do it for an entire race, but it does mean that it does show that he's capable of something. I mean, we were talking about this after the race, Neil. I was defending him and you were attacking him, but and I actually sort of came around to your way of thinking that I think Maverick's weakness is that he doesn't know. I mean, like they used to say about Maverick Vinales is he can't overtake. He can overtake. He's very good at overtaking. It's just that his racecraft is not where it needs to be. He was letting perfectly good chances to overtake go without actually overtaking, without actually having a go. And I think that's one of the areas that he needs to improve. Also, he was like sort of like making lunges where there was absolutely no point where it was not going to happen. That is also, I think, why he made the mistake. So, yeah, to me, I think if he can improve his overtaking, if he can have that killer instinct, if you compare it, for example, to Marc Marquez, he knows exactly which gap he can go for. He sees a gap. He instinctively understands that this is the gap that I need and that I can exploit, and takes it. Maverick Vinales sort of likes to, he sees a gap. He likes to have a little bit of a think about a gap. He likes to look at it from all perspectives, and at that point it's too late and he can't make the pass. So I think if he can move that, if he can improve that, then genuinely he's going to be a threat. But I also think that he is 100% going to win races.
But also, he's been so weak at the starts. I mean, that's also been a very, very clear vulnerability for Maverick. And, I think he's one of the riders, particularly through, Saturday in Q1 and Q2. If he can't get well placed on the grid, then he's going to be struggling. I do wonder if that's something he can address slightly easier on the Aprilia compared to the Yamaha.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be pretty adamant that, he's sort of found a cure for that. On Sunday, he didn't get the best start. I don't think he used the start device because he felt that he just felt a little bit uncomfortable about where it would engage, because obviously turn 1 isn't a heavy braking zone at Silverstone. Start wasn't great. It does take him a little while to build into races. I mean, we know this. This is something that we saw repeatedly and countless number of times with the Yamaha. But I just think that with the Aprilia, it's such a good package, and with his team sort of defending his corner, I just think we're going to see him having more opportunities where he is fast. I can see a couple of tracks from now until the end of the calendar where he's going to be in the fight for the victory. Which is tremendous. I mean, it's great for Aprilia, it's great for Aleix Espargaro, and it's absolute confirmation that the package that they have is maybe on a similar level to Ducati, because it's not just one rider now that can challenge it for victories.
A question for you both, and it's a big one. So if you don't really want to tackle it then fully, then don't worry. But looking at the results and what happened in Silverstone, and I don't also want to over dramatize this, but we think that for the first time since maybe the early 1960s, the Japanese power grip on MotoGP is fading faster or more heavily than ever? If you look at the top 10 at Silverstone, there was only 2 Japanese bikes in the top 10, down in 7th and 8th positions. The emergence of Aprilia, KTM are getting better. We know there's a lot of Ducatis on the grid. European manufacturers not only have the technology, but if you listen to the likes of Paul Espargaro, they have a working culture for Europeans that just seems to click, to work. Perhaps that is really going to be perhaps the basis, the power basis of MotoGP is shifting. I think it was Matt Burt who said on the World Feed, the commentator, of course, extremely knowledgeable, does a great job, that Ducati has been on every MotoGP podium since Silverstone 2021. I mean, that's an incredible record, and we know how well the Italian factory have developed the Desmos Adichie, and it just seems like there is a bit of a tidal shift going on.
Yeah, I mean, Andrea Dovizioso was, as always, very interesting after the race, and he pointed to this, and he basically said, is the approach, and it's not something new, it's not something from the last couple of years, it's been like the past 5 years. What's happening is there is limited testing, and as there is less testing, there are less opportunities for the factory riders to actually ride the bikes. That means that you have to take a much more aggressive approach to racing, which is something that Gigi Dall'Igna said to me in Barcelona when I interviewed him there. Interviews on the website, it's absolutely worth reading. Is that he said, look, we need as much data as we can, and one of the big changes that he made when he came was to actually be more aggressive about trying new things. He said, we were riding around at the back, but people were afraid of trying new things because they were afraid the bike would break down. And if the bike is break down in 12th place, then what's the difference between a D and F? Do you know what I mean? Better to try things out, to try to make progress, to try to improve, suffer the bike breaking down, But then at least you're making progress. And the European manufacturers have been much more aggressive about that. It also helps that they are based in Europe. But also, if you look at the level of test riders that they've brought in, Michele Pirro has been outstanding. I mean, like Aprilia, to an extent, they've been fortunate because they have they've had concessions that they've been able to do, test and develop throughout the season. KTM brought in Dani Pedrosa, which was a big thing. So they had Mika Kallio, who is already a very good rider in his own right, and Dani Pedrosa. Dani Pedrosa, multiple race winner. We saw Ducati chasing Casey Stoner used to chase Casey Stoner briefly as a test rider. Then we saw here them use Michele Pirro. When Pirro sort of understood that it was going to be hard for him to get a full-time ride, he accepted. And the level of Pirro is just exceptional. And all of these things have meant that it's that much easier for the European manufacturers to make advance. And the Japanese manufacturers have been much more conservative. They don't like bringing new updates. They don't like trying things during the races. They don't like making big steps. I mean, we've seen Honda make this massive step with the brand new Honda. It's completely designed, with the new RC213V, and that I think has been quite a revolution for them. So it's been quite radical for them. So it is genuinely, I think, they will need to change their approach. The Japanese manufacturers need to become a lot more aggressive about their testing programs, about the development programs, about trying new things, bringing new things to races just to try, and they're spending a lot more time testing in Europe.
I think we can see that Yamaha, one of the Japanese factories, is maybe going down the path that, say, Aprilia have looked at. They've brought in an ex-Formula One engineer to work on their engine for next year. That's something that Aprilia has done in the past. Maybe it's like not just looking from within for expertise on how they can go forward. As Dave said, that sort of conservative in-house approach that the Japanese factories tend to take. The only thing is, I agree. Like, I think what we saw at the Sachsenring, at Assen, we had no Japanese bike in the top 7. I think that was the first time that's happened in MotoGP or Premier Class race since 1969. Again, on Sunday at Silverstone, we had no, I think Alex Rins was the only guy in the top 7 from a Japanese manufacturer. This isn't going to, I think, really change next year because Suzuki are obviously withdrawing. Yamaha will only have 2 bikes, and then we'll have 4 Hondas, so 6 Japanese machines on the grid against, just a swath of Ducatis, and 4 Aprilias now expanding, as well as 4 KTMs. So, this is something that's going to change next year. Sorry, 2 KTMs and 2 gas machines there, we were going to say.
No. I was going to say Marc Marquez. If he's back and he's fit, then again we get a completely distorted picture because it's Marc Marquez.
Well, also, if you're Honda and you're Yamaha, if you have Quartararo and you have Marquez, then, that kind of philosophy of why do we need anybody else? I mean, it's falling down when they're not there, of course. And Dave, I mean, you say that this shift has been happening maybe for 5 years, but a European manufacturer still hasn't won the title for 15 years now. So, and it could very much happen again this year that Fabio Quartararo defends his crown and Yamaha, in the top spot. And theoretically could as well next year with only 2 bikes on the grid.
Yeah, but I mean, who has won the championship in the past few years? I mean, Marc Marquez, right? And I don't think anyone would claim that it was definitely Honda rather than Marc that won those championships. We saw Joan Mir have an exceptional 2020, but 2020 was such a weird year that it distorted the entire picture. And again, Marc Marquez wasn't there. We saw
Jorge Lorenzo.
Yeah, exactly. Fabio Quartararo in 2021, when Quartararo really made a step to be so much better than everyone else. To me, I think that is you can't take the right, or you have to be careful about taking the rider out of the equation because the riders are making a lot of difference here.
Well, we're going to enter the second ad break now when we come back for the last talking point of the weekend, and then we'll pick our winners and losers from the British Grand Prix. Welcome back to the last segment of the Paddock Pass podcast. Dave, you're going to highlight how some riders really underestimated the temperatures at Silverstone. It was sunny in the UK, and there was a lack of preparation. I'm not talking about sun cream.
No, I mean, the thing is, so in the run up to every race weekend, what the race engineers do is they sit down, they go through the data from last year, and they sort of like think, okay, and then they match it up against the tyre allocation which they've got from Michelin, and start to make a plan. Because the thing is, you've got 3 lots of 45 minutes of free practice, FP1 through FP through. That's not really 45 minutes. It's basically 3 lots of half an hour, because you've got 15 minutes of trying to set a fast time, and especially a track like Silverstone, which is really, really long. Then you got half an hour of FP4, which is the only time you can actually do some work on your tyres. So you don't really get a chance to try to put together, to properly assess the strength and weaknesses of each tyre. So you have to go in to the weekend with a plan. This is what we're going to try. You have to make some assumptions. I think the teams and the engineers made some assumptions, and one of the assumptions that they made was that the track was not going to be 20 degrees hotter than last year. And so everyone looked at the medium rear, which is what everyone was racing last year. So, for example, Fabio Quartararo didn't touch the hard at all. Pecco Bagnaia looked completely lost. He looked, I won't say completely lost, but, it looked like if he, I think if you looked at his pace based on up to about FP4, you were thinking, if he gets top 7, he'll have salvaged something. No one was thinking, Fabio has totally got this. And again, he didn't touch the hard rear tire. They didn't touch the hard rear tire until the morning. There was only a few riders who actually tried it. Johann Zarco was one of them, and that was why Johann Zarco was one of the riders who looked like he was going to just totally get away with this, totally control the race. It was why we were all saying, I think he's got that. And then what you saw was a whole lot of riders switched to the hard for the race, also because the track temperature was even higher, ambient temperature was even higher, and it completely transformed the race, and especially for Pecco Bagnaia. The most notable thing for me about Pecco Bagnaia's race is when you look at the list of riders' fastest laps, Bagnaia is only 13th. He wasn't fast. He didn't try and run away with it. What he did was understand that, I have to try and make this tire last. He'd already made that mental shift between, the medium, which was, the push and then just see what you can hang on, into build it up and leave as much tire as possible at the end of the race. It was an outstanding. It was. I'm sure that my colleague Neil will much appreciate this. It was a Dovi-esque race by Bagnaia, because it was just an outstanding piece of tire management. It was interesting. One of the shift, I think some of the temperature shift is also because of the difference in the date, moving from earlier or from late August to early August means, for example, that you get 80 minutes less sunlight every day, which is an incredible, because I went to look at it, it's 83 minutes. There was 83 minutes less sunlight or less daylight on the 7th of August 2022 than there was on the 29th of August 2021, which is a huge amount. And what that means is there's less time for the asphalt to absorb temperature and more time for it to lose temperature sort of at the end of August. At the start of August, everything is just hotter. Everything is, and that stresses the tyre more. And I think, to me, that was the difference. As soon as the riders twigged that it was the hard tyre that they were going to need, and it was risky because the left side, because the left doesn't get a lot of action, and the left side, unless you warmed it up properly, as Aleix Espargaro found out, it could really bite you. So you had to be patient. You had to wait until the tire came to you, the race came to you, and once it did, then it was sort of then it was sort of hanging in there. And I think that to me was the real greatness of Bagnaya's race, especially.
Dave, did you say 83 minutes less light? Because
yes,
that is one of the most
83 minutes.
That's one of the most gloriously geeky information or slices of information I've heard on the Paddock Pass podcast.
I will not lie. I did actually try and find out how many degrees inclination of sunlight there changed as well, but that was a little bit beyond my Google skills at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, there you go, folks. You get it all on this particular podcast. I thought it was great the way that the tyre situation, Dave, pretty much flipped the race on its head, because I'm sure all three of us thought that when Alex Rins got to the front, we were going to see the first repeat winner in like 8 editions of the British Grand Prix. It wasn't to be, and I think Rins's face and also his demeanour in the post-race media debrief pretty much said it all. It was a big miscalculation. I mean, a number of riders, at least half of the top 10, I think, suffered with tyre wear and tyre drop. And also some of the, I think Miguel Oliveira may have used a hard, or he made a better tyre choice. That's why he was able to push and gain a number of positions in the last phases of the race. So it goes to show that, sometimes despite all the experience and the technology and the expertise in the garages, that it's not always the right call. And of course, Pecco's statement about finding something with the hard rear, what that something was, we didn't quite find out, but that was the basis of his race win.
You look at, you mentioned Rins there. I mean, Rins was the guy that actually set the fastest lap of the race on lap 4, and that was 0.6 faster than Bagnaya's fastest lap. And you wonder whether just those exerts that Rins put in at the start of the race to build up that advantage whenever Johann Zarco crashed out, was that something that cost him out? I mean, was the sort of tire wear situation so delicate that even if you pushed a little bit early in the race, then it could really affect you. And Rins had nothing left towards the end. He was pretty devastated. Bagnaia, great ride. I think he said it was the best race of his career, because really had to dig in, really had to fight. At no point in the weekend were you looking at him and thinking he's the guy that's going to be on the podium even, maybe. Yet he managed to do it. And of course, he had the good old pep talk from 2 of the former greats to help him. I think he spoke to Casey Stoner to ask what he did differently. And he said to just be a little gentler leader with the throttle at certain points on the track than what Pecco was doing. And of course, his mentor, Mr. Valentino Rossi, had a word in his ear, I think, on Saturday night, saying, "Do not fuck up your tire choice. You've done it before. Don't do it this weekend." So I think he can also thank the great doctor partly for that triumph.
Yeah, I mean, to come back to Alex Rins, first of all, it was interesting watching the podium guys chatting before the podium ceremony, and talking about Alex Rins, saying, coming through, he burned up his tires. They were convinced that he burned up his tires just for pushing so hard early on. And I think that was spot on, because that was exactly what, it wasn't what Alex Rins said himself, but if you read between the lines and sort of like looked at what he'd done, then you sort of said, he lost lots of grip at the end of the race. I wonder whether that was because he was riding like an absolute loon in the first 5 laps. Also, the interesting thing for me about Bagnaya's advice from Stoner, I mean, like Rossi was key in telling him, helping him to understand, managing the temperature of the tires. The advice from Stoner was interesting in that Stoner said, be smoother on the throttle, save your tire, later on the throttle to save your tire. And Bagnaia said, like, that worked up until like the last 5 laps, and then he realized, okay, I've got to change my style. He went back to his natural style, which is to push the front more, is to brake later. But the fact that he could switch styles in the first part of the race and save his tire, and then capitalize on his own style at the end when the rear was pretty much gone, that was impressive. Because also he did suffer a lot of drop off towards the end of the race. If you look at the Rins was doing 21.7, I think, or sorry, 20.17 by the end of the race, and Bagnaia was still doing 2.06, it's 2.07. So really an impressive piece of tire management.
Guys, we'll come to the section of the show where we're going to talk about our winners and losers from the British Grand Prix. I'm going to go first. I think, also talking a little about some of the news that we heard from Silverstone. I would like to say, like I mentioned earlier, I think racing was the winner for MotoGP generally at the British Grand Prix, but also I think potentially some MotoGP riders of the future. We saw Triumph announced that they're bringing a new engine configuration to the Moto2 class, more revs, more options, more gearing potential. So I think there could be a little bit more of a bigger palette there for Moto2 riders to get some gist or some vague feeling about what they're going to encounter when they come into the MotoGP class. So that was pretty cool, as well as to see Triumph display some of those fantastic old motorcycles and a big display of their 150-year-old heritage. That was and particularly nice of them to do it quite close to the media centre. So we got to walk past it every time that we had to head into the paddock. Neil, I'm tempted to say my loser from the British Grand Prix is you, because, and I'm not referencing your fantasy team, but it was hard standing next to you while Andrea Dovizioso gave his farewell press conference, that he's officially bowing out of MotoGP for good this time and doing it prematurely. I thought you conducted yourself with decorum, with dignity. You held it together. It was, yes, it was. I'm proud of you. I thought you coped extremely well in the circumstances. But no, I think my loser, it just has to be HRC again. Barely getting 2 riders in the top 15 and point scoring positions. It all looks so bright on Thursday, of course, because Taka Nakagami had a new chassis. It was something that Stefan Bradl had already tested, but apparently was a little bit different further still. The test rider Nagashima had been riding with it in Motegi, so Taka had a little bit of glow about him on Thursday, but then by, I think it was Saturday, was saying he felt quite lost. So it was, still, Dave, you mentioned earlier the Japanese don't like to test when they're raced, but Honda are firmly in that situation now. Alex Marquez, I think, is already dreaming of Ducati. Paulo Spargaro wasn't given the same configuration as Taka Nakagami. And when it comes to Honda, we're just talking about if Marc Marquez might appear at Red Bull Ring to say, hello, everyone, sign a few autographs and bugger off. Whether he can actually test at Misano is another thing. It seems to be that Honda are pinching their hopes on somebody, or pinching their hopes rather, on somebody that's not there. And, Marquez seems to be making progress with his preparation. If you just look at his social media account, whether he will be in Misano is the big talking point. And I guess we'll have some more news if he does show up at the Red Bull Ring. So there we go. But Neil, just quickly before your winners and losers, how are you coping with Andrea Dovizioso's fade away from MotoGP? Although I have to say that Luca Marini's insights in MotoGP says, that we have something of an heir apparent when it comes to an Italian sage for motorcycle racing.
I just need someone to break it all down for me, Ed. So if one of you guys can maybe take on that role in future weeks, future months, future years, then that'd be most welcome. Because some of these things in MotoGP are a bit too complex for my little tiny brain, and having someone with the kind of skill to talk in layman's terms as Dovizioso could was always most welcome. But yes, so my winner, I guess I'm going to have to say Aprilia, just because they have now scored successive podiums with Maverick Vinales. I think it's great that he's there now fighting at the front of races. It's absolute confirmation that they've got a fantastic bike. I don't think we needed that, to be fair, but for the confirmation, and also just the fact that in a complicated weekend for Aleix Espargaro, they come away from Silverstone having lost just 1 point in the championship club. So I think, yes, Dave said it was a missed opportunity earlier for Aleix. It was, but talk about limiting the damage when you were riding with a fractured right heel. I mean, not bad. So yeah, I think Aprilia come away as the big winners.
And who was your loser?
My loser was fast Fabio Quartararo, or not so fast Fabio Quartararo on Sunday, as he should have been known. It's interesting, isn't it? Just how it can change so quickly. After Germany, it just seemed like an absolute given that Fabio was going to romp to his second straight title. Didn't seem that anyone could mount a challenge to him, let alone be consistent in doing so. Yet, Fabio comes away from Assen and Silverstone, 2 tracks that you would have expected him to clean up at with, just 8 points from a possible 50. And suddenly you're thinking the title race is back on, because the next tracks we're going to, Red Bull Ring, Misano, Aragon. I mean, 2 of those you can think are going to be very difficult for Yamaha this year, Red Bull Ring and Aragon, Fabio's bogey circuit. So I think that this isn't quite a done deal just yet, and he must be looking at someone like Pecco Bagnaia, who should be great at the next street circuits as the kind of coming man. So suddenly I think we have a title fight again in our hands.
You say that the Red Bull Ring is a bad track for Fabio, but then my abiding memory of last year was Fabio Quartararo sort of breaking what looked like about 200 meters sort of later than everyone else and overtaking everyone. So I'm not convinced that it's going to be a bad track for him. I think that Fabio can actually do really, really well at
if his brakes work, Dave.
Well, yeah. if his brakes work, yeah. But I mean, Brembo should have fixed that. I mean, their latest package is pretty good. So
he was good there last year, Dave. But it's a bike that stood still, where the other, the Aprilis and the Ducatis are taking big steps ahead now.
Exactly. And you also said he's only scored 8 points, 8 points out of a possible 50, and it's worth pointing out that the person who did score a possible 50 out of 50 is Pecco Bagnaia. So I mean, my winner is Pecco Bagnaia for exactly that reason. The fact that he scored 50 points out of the last 2 races, taken a big chunk out of Fabio Quartararo, and it was just an outstanding ride. It was just genuinely a fantastic, mature, intelligent ride. He put everything together. He did everything right. Well, I mean, you have to scrap Friday and Saturday. I mean, what they learned on Friday and Saturday was that they'd chosen the wrong tire, and then once they'd figured out that they needed the hard rear, then it was just a fantastic, just a really, really outstanding race. So for me, head and shoulders, Pecco Bagnaia wins that.
And it goes to show, Dave, that you can take the man out of Ibiza, and you can also take the Ibiza out of the man.
Yeah, apparently so. Yes, I mean, I actually think on Thursday I didn't think that Pecco handled that particular controversy very well. There was a lot of sort of sniping about it and trying to pretend it was all forgotten, gone and forgotten. But I think in the press conference he got asked about that, and he was much cleverer with his responses, like saying, look, I made a mistake and I shan't do it again, and I've learned from it, and all the rest of it. I thought he was I thought he handled that very well. I don't think Ducati have handled it very well, but it's not for me to say. In terms of sorry,
it is for you to say. You're a journalist.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. I'm supposed to just spout opinions, aren't I? Yeah, no, I mean, like they should have been all over it. They should have they've done a terrible job of sports washing drunk driving, which is an incredibly idiotic thing to do. And they could have, signed him up to be the figurehead of some anti-drink driving initiative. It would have meant that he'd have to turn up somewhere for 2 afternoons in the year, get his face plastered all over posters, and job that he would have come out looking contrite and fantastic. And now they just sort of like try to sweep it all under the carpet. And here I am slagging them off on the Paddock Pass podcast. So there you go. That is generally. Yeah, it generally means you've done a bad job. If you've got an idiot like me spouting off about you on podcasts, yeah, exactly. So anyway, but my loser, not Pecco Bagnaia,
or Ducati,
or Ducati's PR department. No, my loser has to be Joan Mir, because it does seem that. I mean, if he keeps going at this rate, he will actually be paying Repsol Honda to ride there. Again, he looked like he had decent pace. He had a poor qualifying. He looked like he could actually do something, and he ends up crashing out again. And you can't do that. You just can't keep on doing that. It really seems that he's lost his focus, that he's been affected by things that they can't quite put a whole package for him together. So, with Joan Mir, as soon as he gets a good result, then he can turn it around again. But there's been this long string of disappointing and bad results, and this was another one in that long list, and it's not looking. It's just not looking very good.
Well, listen, guys, we come to the end of the Paddock Pass podcast. Neil, safe travels home from the UK. Dave, you also on 2 wheels, and good luck trying to catch up with Cormac GP on the way to the Red Bull Ring. I think you'll see him for all of maybe 2 miles, and that'll be it. We'll be back next week to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix. It's going to be a busy one. Some announcements expected, and some other news, of course, as we headed firmly into the second phase of the MotoGP season. Thanks ever so much for listening, guys. Don't forget to send us any feedback through Twitter. For those listening through other forms, such as Apple, then leave us a vote or a comment or subscribe. We're also on Patreon, as we've mentioned several times, where we bring detailed race notes, some opinions and news that we've heard direct from the circuit. So follow us on Patreon for those latest updates or daily updates from the Grand Prix events themselves. And that's it. We'll be back next week. Sorry, Neil.
Follow us on YouTube as well, because of course you could be watching this in visual form.
Yes, if you wish to inflict any sort of visual punishment on yourself, then our three faces can be seen on YouTube. Good point, Neil. Thank you for bringing that one up. Other than that, it'll be a pleasure to talk to you all again next week.